service. What I want to do this morning, if you guys don't mind, is to challenge you to consider the idea that sometimes the reason God has not answered the prayer of the person sitting next to you is because God is patiently waiting for you to say yes to the opportunity of a lifetime that he has given you to meet the needs of the person sitting next to you. You guys want me to run that back one more time? Well, you got it. Okay, and I understand that this is one of those things, one of those kind of pastor, preachy talk type things that people like me say on stage, on church. It makes you want to roll your eyes so far back up your head that you give yourself a migraine. But if you guys are patient with me this morning, I would love the opportunity to actually build a case that sometimes the reason God has not answered the prayer of the person sitting next to you is because God is patiently waiting for you to take advantage of the opportunity he's giving you to meet the needs of the person next to you. Can I take it a step further for those of us in the room in here who are actually selfless enough to pray for other people in the room? All right? I mean, I'm talking like legit pray that God will do something for the person next to you, like not like the stuff that I do sometimes. You guys do that thing sometimes that we do when people ask us to pray for them. We're like, yeah, I'll pray for you. And then you forget. And then you see them and you whisper a prayer real quick. Like, oh, Lord, just do something. Praying for you, man. Praying for you. You've been praying for you. Anybody? Am I the only one that does that? Okay, I do that a lot more than I'd like to admit. But you can pray for me if you're the praying type. But for those of you in the room who actually legit pray for people, here's the question. What are the chances that you are the answer to the prayer that you're praying for the other person? Right? What are the chances? What are the chances that some of us have been looking up to heaven going, God, do something for that person, and God is actually looking down at you going, you do something for that person? Can I tell you what I think? Okay, and nobody asked, I know, but based on what we're about to see in today's narrative, I think the chances are a lot higher than you and I would like to think. I think the chances that sometimes God isn't doing what we're asking him to do, it's not because he doesn't care, it's because he's actually waiting for us to be the answer to our own prayer. Just ask Jesus' closest friends 2,000 years ago when Jesus tasked them with the impossible responsibility of doing something for 5,000 people who were hungry and tired. Okay, and I know a lot of you in here know this story like the back of your hand, and that's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm going to tell you right now, I know I say this stuff all the time, but if you're in the room and you're not familiar with this story because you're new to church in the Bible, I'm legit jealous of you. I am jealous because I wish I could see this story with fresh eyes for the very first time. Again, John chapter 6 is where we're going to set up tent here in a little bit. If you have a Bible with you, turn to John chapter 6. If you're there, say, I'm there. If not, say, I need more time. Pastor, give me more time. Or say nothing. That works too, Come on now, young adults. We did this for like a whole weekend, and y'all just left me hanging. I don't love that. You're there. Thank you. You're there. Anybody need more time? Can I go? Need more time? Okay, I'm going to give you a couple seconds. John chapter 6. It's the fourth gospel in the New Testament. I don't know if this helps you. It's page 971 in my Bible, so probably not very helpful. But I'm going to just throw that out there. John chapter 6. Are we there? Okay. All right. If you're not there by now, probably not going to be there anytime soon. So I'm just going to read it. All right. So listen, the writer says this. It says sometime after this, it says that Jesus did something. Jesus crossed over to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That's the Sea of Tiberias. And it says after Jesus crossed over to the sea, the writer says that a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the sign that he had performed by healing the sick. Now, the writer doesn't tell us how Jesus crossed the sea. Like, we don't know. I like to use my imagination. I don't know if it was a jet ski or if he kayaked or maybe he did that thing they do at Disney when they stuff 1,000 people into the ferry and you're standing like this going, are we there yet? All we know is that somehow Jesus crossed the sea, and apparently there was a huge crowd of people that were so determined to be with Jesus wherever he went that they not only met him where he crossed the sea to, but the writer tells us that after Jesus crossed the sea and went up the side of the mountain, all of these people followed him. Listen to what he says in verse 3. It says, after Jesus crossed over, it says he went up the side of a mountain. and sat down with his disciples. He's like, I just need a little time out. Can I just get a little break from this crowd? He went up a side of the mountain. Verse 4 says this, and this is the writer's way of just kind of giving us a time stamp in history to what's about to happen. It says the Jewish Passover was near. Then it says in verse 5, it says, when Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd coming towards him, and we're going to find out later this great crowd is thousands and thousands of people. It says that Jesus said this to one of his best friends named Philip. He said this. It says, where are we going to buy bread for all of these people to eat? So I want you to imagine that you're one of Jesus' 12 friends, and you all just kind of jumped on a jet ski. You went across the sea. You're on the side of the mountain. You're like, man, we finally get a break, man. We've been working hard. And all of a sudden, you look up, and there's thousands of people coming towards you, and you're looking at Jesus going, we didn't have a plan for this in our itinerary. And then Jesus looks at you, and he's like, hey, where are we going to buy bread for all this people? I want to read you this part of the narrative, if you guys don't mind, in the Gospel of Matthew, right? If you're new to the Bible, there are 4 gospel accounts to the life of Jesus. It's 4 eyewitness accounts, and they all kind of tell the story in a little bit of a unique way. And it's interesting because this miracle that we're about to read is actually, if I remember correctly, the only miracle that's recorded in all 4 Gospels. And so I want to read you how Matthew kind of documents the interaction that Jesus has with his disciples when he goes over the side of the mountain and there's a crowd coming towards them. I just think it puts a nice perspective and spin on it. And so if you could just kind of flip over to Matthew chapter 14. I just want to read a couple verses in there. If you had a hard time finding John 6, just stay in John 6. Matthew 14 will be on here. I don't want you to get lost because you're going to be like the next 20 minutes trying to find it. Okay, so listen to what Matthew said. Again, the context here is what? Jesus just crossed the sea. Thank you. All right? And then he went up the mountain. And then the crowd followed him. And he says this in Matthew chapter 14, verse 14. It says, when Jesus landed and he saw a great crowd, the writer says he had compassion on them. He healed their sick. And then it says here, right here in verse 15, it says, as the evening approached, the disciples came to him and they said to him, they said, fam, this is a remote place. We're on the side of the mountain. It's getting really, really late. It's like 11:30 at night right now. And here's what we think you should do. They said, send the crowds away because it's real late. If you send them away right now, they can go to the villages, and hopefully there's a Waffle House open somewhere. There's always a Waffle House, and that's basically the last option because we're in the remote place, and there's no other place for them to eat. So can you just send them out? I wrote that in my Bible, by the way. I wrote, hopefully a Waffle House is open, right? He's like, just send them away so they can go buy food for themselves. Parents, the tension here, the pressure that the disciples are feeling when they made this suggestion is what you feel if you were, what you would feel rather, if you were on a long road trip with all of your kids in the van. You've just spent a week in vacation and your kids are in the back and they are tired and they are hungry and they are awake and it is 1 a.m. and they are whining and they're going, we need some food. And you just saw a sign that said next exit is in 350 miles, and you are looking at your spouse like, I know it sounded like a good idea when we said we're going to drive through the night, but if we do not stop in the next 2 minutes, there's about a 0% chance that this thing's going to work out well for all of us. Right? You know that tension when you're like, man, we got to do something right now. Right? The disciples are looking at this huge crowd of people, and they're looking at the clock, and they're going, okay, Jesus, I mean, this is about the time right now where we should probably just dismiss these guys. And I want you to listen to Jesus, man. He cracks me up sometimes. I want you to just listen to what he says. This guy's hilarious. Listen to what he says in verse 16. Their suggestion was, send them home, man. Send them packing. And then Jesus said this. Jesus says, hey, they don't need to go anywhere because I already ordered QQ, catering. You know, it's coming in about 2 minutes. We got Costco pizzas. It's awesome. It's going to be amazing. No, he's like, they don't need to go anywhere. And the disciples are like, why don't they need to go anywhere? And he says this. He says, you give them something to eat. Yeah, I know. And they're like, look at all these people, send them away. And it's like, no. I got a better idea. You feed them. And the disciples are like thousands. Right, a couple weeks ago, some people in the room and I think about 10 of us from our church, we went to feed the UT Rockets, and it was amazing. And we catered Chick-fil-A nuggets for them. And I don't know if you've ever seen a football player eat before, but these guys, I've never seen people, it was a tower. Like, no one ate the salad, by the way, which was hilarious. We got like 4 trays of salad. Nobody touched it, right? They just ignored it. And it was like towers of nuggets. And there was one point I thought to myself, I'm like, wow, we should have bought one of those giant trays for each player. Okay, you know how Chick-fil-A has like the 90-count nugget thing? I'm like, next time we come here, we are buying 60-something. I don't know how much it's going to cost, but we're going to buy about 60-something, 90-something tray nuggets. And we're just going to tell each player, just grab the tray and just go. We're not even going to bother, with the salad or anything just because we know we got to get the protein in. Just grab a tray. Because anything less felt inadequate. And maybe I'm speculating a little bit, but I just wonder if any of Jesus' disciples was tempted to just laugh out loud when Jesus was like, you feed them. And they're like, are you kidding me? There are 5,000 people. And here's the crazy thing. The writer tells us a little bit later that these were just 5,000 men, not including the women and the children. So this wasn't 5,000 total. This was like all the dudes, had to get the little ticket thing when they came in. But we're not even counting all the mamas, and we're not going to count all the kids and all the babies. We're not counting all of those people. That's how big this crowd was. And Jesus is going, why don't you do something about the need? I want to go back again to John chapter 6, and I want to read you how my man, Uncle Phil, responds to Jesus' proposal. Right? So let's go back again. I'm going to read verse 5 again. It says, when Jesus looked up and he saw this great crowd, all right, coming towards him, he said to Phil, he says, hey, man, Phil, where are we going to buy bread for all of these people? He says in verse 6 that he said this only because he was going to test him, because he already had in mind what he was going to do. More on that in a little bit, but I want you to listen to this guy. I love Phil. Listen, Phil said this. He says, it will take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Anybody here play fantasy football, right? You know how they always have rankings of every players? Like, I decided this week that I'm going to start ranking the disciples. I'm going to put Philip in my top 5, Mike. I'm going to put him in my top 5. Because this may be the most sarcastic comment I've read in the whole Bible. Right? I don't know if they have a font for sarcasm in Greek, but if they do, it would be right here. Because Jesus said, hey, man, where are we going to buy bread? And here's my man's response. He's like, oh, you want us to buy bread for all these people? That is a great idea that helps nobody. Exactly, because you know what? Not only do we need somebody that has a debit card, that has an unlimited amount of money, maybe at least a year's wages, but even if we did, and we went to, Costco right now or Chick-fil-A, and we ordered all the trays of nuggets they had, they would not be enough. We would have to take one nugget per 50 people. Everybody just take a little nibble. You take a little nibble and pass to your neighbor, right? Jesus said, where are we going to buy bread? And my man's like, are you kidding me? He's like, man, it would take more than a year's wages for us to buy enough bread for each person to have like a little bite. And we can laugh at Philip all we want. I'm kind of kidding, but he was right. Right? That's what I would have said if I were there. I'm like, yeah, it's not happening. You want to come up with a different idea? I know you're Jesus and all your ideas are supposed to be amazing, but that's not a good idea. He was right, which begs the question, why would Jesus ask him to do something that he knew he couldn't do? Right? If Jesus already knew that, hey, this is way too many people, and there's no way, this guy does not have the bread for that much bread, right? He already knew. He's like, I know how much money we got. There's no way we're buying enough bread for all these people. If he already knew, why in the world would Jesus look at Phil and go, hey, man, I think you should buy them bread? The writer tells us exactly why, right? He tells us. He says in verse 6, he says he asked him this, why? Only to test him. Now, I don't know what you think of when you hear the word test, but testing here is not test like Jesus is trying to trick him or trap him or test like, I'm going to see what you say and you're going to get an A, a B, or you're going to get an F. No, test here, I believe, is probably better interpreted in context as it's almost like Jesus was trying to give him a chance to see if he would trust him to do what only he could do. right? What Jesus was testing in this narrative was not Philip's ability to find enough money to buy enough bread for all the people. Jesus already knew that Philip couldn't do that. What Jesus was testing here was to see whether or not Philip would take this opportunity when he saw the need to trust Jesus to do what only Jesus could do. But obviously, Philip's not on the same wavelength as Jesus, because the first thing that Philip went to, the first thing that he did is the first thing that a lot of us do when we're confronted with a need, right? He went to his inability, what he couldn't do, right? He's like, there's no way in the world we're going to pull this off. And what Philip missed in this passage was an opportunity in this moment, don't miss this, to be a part of what God was already going to do. Isn't that an interesting phrase that he said he asked him, he asked him this only to test him, because he already had a plan, right? So it's not like Jesus was sitting there going, man, I need to troubleshoot. How in the world are we going? What do you think, Philip? You got any ideas? Can we do a little think tank? Can we call a timeout and get all the disciples together? Anybody got anything? Anybody's cell phone reception working on the mountain? Can we Google something? Can we ask ChatGPT? Like, what do you think? We got 5,000 people on the side of the mountain, and we got one Waffle House about 30 miles away. I don't know what to do. Anybody got any ideas? No, Jesus already had a plan. And so when he's testing Philip, so to speak, what he's doing is giving him an opportunity to trust him. This may not be the perfect comp, but my daughter and I, Nora, last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago, she played a soccer game like 2 hours away, and we're driving back home, and it was super duper late, you know, and I knew it was going to be late, and her mom and I had already talked, and I'm like, okay, you kids are going to be in bed by the time we get home, and so I'm gonna stop somewhere, and I'm going to get us some food, and maybe I'll even get us some ice cream, you know, just kind of, we already covered all those details, and Nora didn't know this, and we're driving, and she's like, I'm hungry. And I said, where do you want to stop to get food? And you know what my daughter did not say? She didn't say, how are we going to pay for it, Daddy? How are we going to pay? Okay, I just don't know how in the world you're going to be able to pay for this meal that we're about to stop and eat. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe you're not happy about this, but the other day your phone was sitting around, and I kind of looked, and I saw your Robinhood app was up, and all the stocks were red, you know, and I did a little research, and I found that red's not good, and I've just been worried about you, Daddy, because it's all red. It's not good, and I just don't know how in the world we're going to pay for this dinner, right? I mean, come on now. I got 5 kids. Not once have any of my kids ever wondered how we're going to pay for food, right? I mean, we go out to a restaurant. Come on, anybody here got kids in here? Anybody got grown kids in here? Like, you got kids where you go to a restaurant, they don't even pretend to take the check. Like, you know, they're not even doing the fake out, like, is this together, or is this like, they're not even thinking about it. They're like, okay, can I get a to-go box? I'm out of here. And you're like, I guess I'm going to pay for this meal. Right? The reason my daughter never suggested, the reason your kids show up and they just trust that you're going to, it's because kids understand their part and your part. They know what's their part and they know what's your part. Their part is to show up. Your part is to provide. Their part is to trust that you're going to find the resources to give them what they need. Your part is to find the resources to give them what they need. And so are you guys following this? When Jesus was testing Philip, he wasn't testing Philip's ability to generate money or food for the crowd. No, what he was testing was whether or not Philip knew his part. What he was testing is whether or not he was going to trust Jesus to do what only Jesus could do. And again, I know the whole, you know, my daughter and I think is maybe not the perfect comp, but I just think it's so interesting that in this passage, when Jesus threw this scenario out to his followers, they all missed the point, except for a little kid, right? Check it out. Listen to what happens. After you know, Philip, you know, drops his sarcastic bomb, like, it's going to take more than a year. Listen to what it says in verse 8. It says, another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, he spoke up. He says, here is a boy with 5 loaves, barley loaves, and 2 small fish. He's like, but how far will that go among so many? Spoiler alert, a lot farther than any of them could ever imagine. All right? So Jesus is going, y'all feed them. where are we going to buy bread? Philip's like, we don't have the bread for the bread. Sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. And Andrew goes, well, there's a little boy over here, and he's got 5 small barley loaves, and he's got 2 fish. But how far, he says, will that go? I've heard this story my whole life growing up in church, and for some reason, I used to always picture it like they jumped this kid in the back alley. Right? Anybody else? Like there's a little boy just walking, and Peter just gives him a wedgie, throws him in the locker, and steals his lunch. And it's like, well, here's what we got. I mean, seriously, that's how. And I don't know, and we don't have a lot of context on the little boy, but the more I read it, the more it reads to me like that doesn't seem to be the case. Right? It doesn't feel like a case of, little boy got jumped, they stole his lunch and offered it as tribute to Jesus, and the boy's in the corner crying like, I just want my tuna sandwich. And they're like, shut up, I mean, notice, what does the writer says? That Andrew does not say, here's a lunch, right? He says, what does he say? He says, here is a boy with the lunch. And again, maybe I'm reading a little too much into it, but to me, it's almost like, there's this crowd and everyone's trying to troubleshoot, like, what are we going to do? And Philip's like, we can't afford it. And they're like, what's going to happen? And everyone's kind of scrambling, and Jesus is standing there with a smirk in his face because he already knows what he's going to do, and he's just testing to see how they're going to respond. And somehow, in the midst of the chaos, I just picture this little boy Little Joey just walked up and he's like, right? And they're like, move out of the way, little Joey. And he's like, I don't know, I heard people talking about food, and so this is my actual lunchbox, by the way, so you guys know. Right, Lori? It is. Yeah, she said it is. Some of you may have been in the room, but I actually spoke in this room earlier this spring to like 200 TCS high schoolers. And I was running late because I picked up donuts for the whole room. And so I came in, I had to speak. I came all the way to the front, and I was sitting there. I had all my stuff. I didn't get a chance to put my lunch in the fridge. And it wasn't until I was in a room with 200 high school kids that I realized I was holding a frozen bag. And they're all looking at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, this is my lunch. Because I'm secure in my identity. I don't need to prove nothing to nobody. Let it go. That's right. That's good. I don't believe I didn't think about that. It was right there. I'm going to steal that for second service. Don't tell anybody. All right? What are we going to do? And little Joey goes, and what I want to propose for you today is that sometimes this is what it looks like to trust God. Okay, and I know that a lot of us want to quickly fast forward to the part of the story where Jesus multiplies it and feeds 5,000 people, and that's awesome, and that's great, and it's an amazing ending to the story. But I just want to make sure that we don't miss a part of the lesson that Jesus wants us to see in this passage, which I believe Jesus is trying to show us that sometimes the most tangible way to trust God when you're in an impossible situation is to just show up and be available with whatever you have. Okay, and we don't have a lot of info on this kid. We don't know if it was like the lunch his parents packed him. We don't know if he was out there trying to hustle and sell bread and fish. We're not really sure. What we do know, though, is that this little boy got a chance to be a part of one of the greatest miracles ever recorded in the entire scriptures, simply because he was available with what he had. Here's the moral of the story. God can do more with your availability than your ability. Oh, man, somebody tell me to say that again, because that's a word. Right? Come on now. God can do more with our availability than our ability. Philip was focused on his ability. He's like, we can't afford it. We don't have the money. We don't have the credit. We don't have the debit card. And even if we did, we're in a remote village. We're on the side of the mountain. There's no way we can get food. For all of this people, he was focused on his ability. And the little boy is like, man, I don't know anything about that. I'm not sure how to coordinate all of those details, but I'm available and I got some lunch with me if you can do anything with this. Is it possible, you guys, that we are focused on the wrong things when it comes to meeting the needs around us? Is it possible that so many of us in the room, myself included, are focused on what we have the ability or inability to do, but what God is wondering about is your availability? That God's saying, I'm not inviting you to be a part of this because I think you're going to come carry the whole thing on your shoulders. No, I'm just wondering if you are available. God can do more through our availability than he can our ability. Let me put it in the context of this generosity conversation that we've been having. I think for a lot of us in here, if we are honest with ourselves, the reason that we don't live generous lives is because we've disqualified ourselves from being generous based on our inability to be generous. Right? So we're like, man, if I could, I would. Right? If I made that much money, I had that in the bank, if I could afford, if I could, I would, man. Pastor, that sounds great. Generosity is normal. That sounds awesome. But if I could, I would, but I can't, so I won't. We're like Philip. We're like, we just don't have enough money to meet the need. And I'm telling you right now that when God invites you into a life of generosity, God is not thinking about your ability. He is wondering about your availability. Right? And I think the default setting for humanity and for followers of Jesus Christ sometimes is that we say to ourselves, right? When he provides, I'll be available. We're not going to say that out loud, but that's kind of like, yeah. When God provides, I'll be available. When I get that job, man, watch me be generous. When I start making, man, watch me. When I have this, watch me. When he provides, then I will do fill in the blank. And I'm hoping this morning to flip that paradigm. I'm hoping that God will do something this morning that we become the kind of people who say, no. I'll be available knowing he'll provide, right? Not when he provides, I'll be available. No, I'm going to be available because I know that when I'm available, he's going to provide. I'm telling you right now, I don't have any science or data to prove this. All I know is what I've seen in the Bible and what I've seen in my life. When you make yourself available for God to use you, he will almost always provide what you need every time. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like when you decide that it's not going to be about your ability or inability, and you're like, I'm just going to show up. I don't know how it's going to come through. I don't even know if I can meet the need, but I'm going to make myself available. When you do that, he always provides. Have you ever noticed how people who are available almost always have what they need to meet the need that they made themselves available to? We think God provided, so they were available, but what if it's the other way around, is that they were available and God then provided? Imagine if we were the kind of church that when we see needs around us, we're like, I'm available. I don't know how we're going to do it, but it's not a lot, but I got a tuna sandwich and a little juice box in here. I'll make myself available. Here's how my mom put it years ago. When I was moving here to the U.S. It's one of the things my mom said to me that I'll never forget. She said this. She said, Sammy, if God can get it through you, he'll get it to you. You got it? If he can get it through you, he'll get it to you. In other words, if he knows that if you're going to make yourself available, you're the kind of person that if I'm going to give you something, you're available to meet a need, God's going to get it to you. So the question really is not, how am I going to get what I need? No, the question my mom was telling me, Sammy, you just got to position yourself in a place where God's blessings can flow through you. You just got to make yourself available, because if you do that, he will get it to you. And if I could add a little addendum to that, it would be this, that not only will he get it to you, but you will be shocked at how much God can multiply the little thing that you show up with. Just ask the little boy who rolled up the side of the mountain with 5 loaves of barley and 2 fish. And everybody's looking at him like, this is not helpful. That's not even enough for Philip. Philip's like, dude, like, I eat that for breakfast, and I'm still hungry. But watch what God does when he showed up. Can I read you the rest of it, right? Listen to what it says. It says, here's what Jesus did after the boy showed up. It says in verse 10 that Jesus then said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place. And they sat down. There was about 5,000 men were there. Again, not counting the women and the children. Verse 11 says this. It says, then Jesus took the loaves. He gave thanks. And then he distributed to those who were seated. And they got as much as they wanted. This is just, I can't even comprehend this. And then he did the same with the fish. And then verse 12 says this. It says, when they had had enough to eat, Jesus said to his disciples, it says, gather the pieces so there are leftovers. Don't let anything be wasted. Verse 13, and I think this is just a flex. Like, he just had to show up. Like, couldn't you? Like, if you could multiply 5 loaves and 2 fish, you could probably just give them enough. But Jesus like, nah, how about, like, we just have some, like, leftovers? That would be kind of pretty impressive, right? Can you imagine that picture on the gram? Like, wow, what are all those? That's after we all ate. He says, so they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets full with pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who have eaten it. Any Chosen fans in here? Anybody love Chosen, the show? Oh, man, it's so good. All right, don't spoil it for me because I haven't seen the last season. Not that I don't know what happens, but, you know. Don't spoil it. I don't know what happens at the end. I'd like to be surprised. Wow, he came back. That's amazing. Okay, so there's this scene. There's this scene. You know, I know there's a lot of artistic liberty, and there's this scene. I think it's in season 3 where Jesus feeds the 5,000 people, and it's such an interesting. It's just interesting when you read things in the Bible and then you get to see it visually, and it's just amazing. But there's this line. I don't know if anybody who's seen it remembers. That's so good, right? The little boy shows up, right? The way they depict it, he shows up, and you know, and he offers what he has, and he says this. This is so good. He says, Jesus asks him what he has, and he says, I know it's not enough. I know it's not enough. And then Jesus says this. He says this. Oh, man, this is so good. You ready? He says this. He says, it's enough for me because I can do a lot with it. Oh, man. This little boy shows up, and he's like, it's not, I know it's not much. It's just, it's not enough. He's in the cry. It's not enough. And Jesus goes, it's enough for the one who spoke the universe into existence. He's like, I can do a lot with a little. Do you guys have any idea what would happen if even half the people in this room who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ decided today that we are going to be the kind of people that actually believe that God can do a lot with a little? Do you have any idea what God will do? The answer is no, by the way. If you're still thinking about it, you have no idea what God will do if you decided today, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, that you're going to be available with whatever you have, however little, because you know that he can do a lot with a little. And I know the odds of you and I being in a position where we get to feed 5,000 people who are hungry and tired is probably really, really small. That's probably not going to happen in your lifetime. But here's the deal. I promise you that there are people around you right now where you live, work, and play. They may not be physically hungry, but you are surrounded by hundreds of people who are spiritually hungry. There are people who are lost. There are people who are hopeless. And there are people who are dying for the things that we have. And a lot of times we disqualify ourselves from being a part of the story because we don't think we are able to change the world. And God's saying, I'm not asking you to take on the burden of changing the world. I'm just wondering if you will be available with the little that you have so that I can multiply it to change the lives of people. Imagine what would happen if we all decided that we're going to show up in whatever spaces God has us, and we're going to be available with the little that we have. Can I give us some examples of some little things that we may be carrying in this room that God can do a big thing with? Thank you, Ava, for nodding. Appreciate it. I was going to do it anyways, but I'm glad I have one person that's at least like, let's have it, right? Just in closing, I just want to share 5 little things that God can do a lot with if you make it available. Right? I don't know what you got in your lunchbox, but I want to give you, it's not exhaustive, but these are 5 things that you may consider little in the grand scheme of things. You're like, it's not a lot. It's just a tiny, it's not even 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's little. And God's saying, if you will make it available, I can do a lot more with it than you could ever imagine. Here's the first one. If you're taking notes or you can take a picture with this, write this down. Because at the end of it, I'm going to ask you to think of 1 or 2 that you're going to apply. The first one is this, is that God can do a lot with your small table if you make seats and invites available to others. 5 things, little things that God can use. One of the little things that God can use is your table. I know it's small. I know it's not a lot. But God's like, if you are available to not only give invites or put seats around the table, I'll do more than you could ever imagine. I don't know if you guys have heard, but word on the street is that we are the loneliest generation in the history of the world. That's what all the research is saying. We're the most connected digitally, but we're also the loneliest. Now, there's different ways to respond to that. We can blame social media, probably a part of it, right? We can pray about it. That's a good thing. I'm never going to ask us not to pray. But at the end of our prayer, I'm wondering what it would be like if our response when we hear things like this is the loneliest generation in the world is not to do what Philip did when he saw the huge need. Like, what if our response is, oh, my goodness, what are you going to do about that? This is not great. It's getting worse in our children. If it's bad now, imagine what it's going to be like for our children. What if our response, rather, is to say, hey, I don't know how we change that. I don't have any kind of secret formula, but here's what I know. I'm going to show up with the little thing that I have, and I'm going to see what God can do. And one of those things is I know that I can put a seat at the table for somebody, and I know that I can invite somebody, so I'm just going to do that. Like, what if we just did that? And it sounds so simple, but this is how Jesus changed the world. Right? 2,000 years ago, what did he do? He walked around and said, hey, Peter, you want to come? And he's like, I'm fishing right now. Yeah, but dude, this is so much better than that. You want to come? We're going to fish from men. Peter's like, okay, sold. I'm out of here. Right? I don't know if you thought about it this way, but all of the people that you look in the New Testament, you're like, I like that guy. That guy did amazing things. It all began with an invitation. Jesus spent so much of his time sitting at tables and inviting people in. Jesus changed the world with simple invitations. I am telling you right now, I have seen this over and over and over again. There are people in your life who are one invite away from life change. Does that blow anyone else away? That we can get in here and we can pray like, God, bring revival, change the hearts of my neighbor, do something in my workplace. And I just wonder sometimes if God's looking at us going, I want to do that. But will you invite them? Right? Will you just invite them? It seems like a little thing, but that person is what some of you in here, that's your story. Your life changed because somebody gave you an invite. Your life changed because somebody pulled a seat for you at the table. And I'm not just talking church, by the way. You can invite them to church, invite them to eat in, invite them to the young adult thing. I hope you do all of those things. But sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes it's inviting them into your home. Man, we're having dinner. You want to come? Do you like pizza? You don't like pizza? We do tacos too, right? What do you like? We'll make whatever. Bring your kids. Let's just come hang out. It seems like a little tiny thing, but man, you have no idea what God will do if you give them that little thing. They say, I'm gonna make my invite available. But Sammy, what if they say no? That's what Lucy, my 3-year-old, does when I ask her a question. She's like, I'm like, that's so cute. I can't even respond to that. What if they say no? They might. But what if they say yes? Right? Come on. What is the worst case scenario? Nah, not really my thing. Great. Awesome. That's it. But what if they say, yes, Louis Giglio said it this way. Say, not everybody will say yes, but everybody deserves to be invited. Everybody does. And so when we see the problems in the world and we get so overwhelmed, what if we just say, I'm going to just make myself available. It's going to be an invite. It's going to be an ask. And it is wild to me, and I know I'm maybe pushing a little too hard. I'll back off your toes in a little bit, I promise. It's just wild to me that there's some of us in here that we've been around this church thing for a really, really long time, and we can't remember the last time we invited somebody in. And I'm not just talking Sunday. I'm talking dinner table. You want to grab coffee? You want to hang? People are dying of loneliness around you. Most people do not have the kind of friendships that you have. People go home after work all day and they sit and they watch Netflix for hours and hours and hours and hours, and then they lay in bed wondering if there's a God or if there's a purpose in this life. And a lot of them are one invite away. One invite to say, hey, come sit with me. Come have dinner. Let's grab coffee. I see you. It's a little thing, but God can do a lot with it. I got 5 of these, and I got 5 minutes, so I better fly through them. Here's the second one. I want to read you a verse, actually. Romans 12:13. Here's what the writer says. This is so great. Paul writing says this. I want you to share with the Lord's people who are in need. I love this. I want you to practice hospitality. Right? We think of hospitality sometimes like this is this, some people just have it and some people don't. And he's like, no, I want you to practice it. If you're an athlete, you know what it's like to practice. My kid plays soccer and I take her out there. I'm like, we got to practice your shots and practice passing and practice how to throw the ball. Paul says, practice the act of hospitality. Hospitality means I'm going to invite people in and I'm going to host them. Practice hospitality, Romans 12. Okay, number 2. Little thing that God can do a lot with. God can do a lot with your limited time. I know we're all looking at the clock already, like, man, I got to get out of here. I mean, what's happening? How long is this thing going to go? He can do a lot with a little bit of the time that you have if you are available to listen and pay attention to other people. Years ago, we did this thing when I was a college pastor at UT called the Listen Project on UT's campus. And we went on campus, and we put couches all over campus, and we held a sign that said, we'll pay you $5 to hear your story. People were like, what? They're like, no, we will. Right? And literally, we call people and be like, hey, sit. Like, what do I have to do? Like, no, we're going to ask you a question, and then we're just going to listen. And at the end of it, we're going to give you $5, 5 minutes. That's it. You're like, that's a good deal. And they sat down. We're like, what was the best day of your life? What's something you're proud of? What are you good at? What was the saddest day of your life? What's something that someone told you you've never? And our goal is we're going to ask one question, and then we're going to shut up. And we're going to listen and pay attention. No cell phones, no looking over their shoulders, no thinking about, that thing we do where someone's talking to you, but really the whole time you're thinking about what you're going to say, how you're going to make it back about you. Anybody else do that? Like they're talking, you're kind of listening, but really you're like, okay, it's my turn. Let me get my turn. Oh, yeah. All right? We're not going to do that. We're just going to listen. And I'm telling you right now, I've done ministry a long time. It is one of the most effective things that we have ever done in ministry. Not one, and we did this a lot. There wasn't one person that got up from that couch and was like, forget you guys, this was stupid. I don't even believe in God. I don't even know why you guys are doing this. No, everybody was like, wow, thank you. No, don't pay me. I feel like I should pay you guys. Because we live in a world that is starving for people to see them. And so maybe you'll never get a mic to stand on a stage to preach to hundreds of people, tell them about Jesus. But you know what? There are people in your life that God's saying, I don't need you to be on some big stage. Can you just give them a little bit of your time? Can you just pay attention? Can you just listen? Can you just ask good questions and just shut your mouth when they start talking and go, Can you clarify that? What do you mean by that? That's amazing. Tell me more about your kids. Tell me about your dreams. You got that promotion? That's amazing. I love that house. What's happened? That's amazing. And we're just going to listen. I'm telling you right now, you do that and it'll blow you away what God can do with something as simple as listening. James 1:19 says it this way. It says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Come on now. If there was like ever a theme verse for this generation, social media, it would be this. Everyone, not just the introverts, everyone, be quick to listen and slow to speak, slow to become angry. Quick to listen, slow to speak. God can do a lot with your limited time. Couple more. Number 3, God can do a lot with your tongue. If you make your thoughts available to others through your words. There are people in your life that if you tell them what you think about them, it would change the trajectory of their lives. And I don't think I'm the only one in this, but every time, if I look back in hindsight at all the defining moments in my life, there was somebody who said something, and I was like, holy cow, I've never thought about myself that way before. 20 years ago when I moved here and I was in college of pharmacy and I was trying to do my thing, I'll never forget this. I don't even know her name. This random lady pulled me over the side of the room and she looked me in the eye and she's like, you need to go home and get on your knees and seek God and ask him if you're in the right place because, man, God is, and she filled in the blank. And I just remember looking at her like, I don't even know who you are, but you just wrecked my life right now. That little conversation changed the trajectory of my life. And there are people around you. And what they need is not, again, I am all for prayer, okay? I hope you guys aren't like, wow, pastor doesn't like prayer. No, I'm all for prayer. Let's pray for each other. I just think it's silly if we're praying for things that God has already equipped us to do. I think it's silly when somebody says, man, I'm discouraged right now. And we're like, I'm going to pray for God to encourage you. I'm like, no, miss me with that. We don't need to pray for God to encourage them. We need to encourage them. Right? I'll pray for you later, but I'm going to use my words and my mouth, and I'm going to make my thoughts available through you, and I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to speak life into you. I'm going to call the best out of you. I'm going to remind you of who you are. Some of us in here think things about people that we have never said to them, and that is a tragedy, because if people knew half of what you think about them and what you see in them and what God is doing in their lives, it would change their lives. And so can we be people who are generous with our words? Here's how my life coach put it to me years ago. He's like, I decided that I am never going to think a good thing about someone without telling them. If I think it, I'm going to say it. Man, when you did that, you crushed it. Man, that was amazing. You look great this morning. You've been working out. What's happening, man? Like, it sounds so simple, but our words are little gifts that God can multiply to do a lot. And if you've never thought about it this way, this is how God has encouraged you. Have you thought about that before? Right? God isn't just in heaven going, all right, I'm just going to pray for you. No, God said, hey, I'm going to give you words. My words. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you about my love. I'm going to tell you about my grace. I'm going to tell you what I see when I look in you. I'm going to tell you about your future. And we have the same opportunity to use our words to be a part of life change. The writer of Hebrews says it this way in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24. He says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. He says, consider it. How are we going to encourage each other towards love? He says, don't give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but do this, encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. He's like, I want you to think about it, consider it. How am I going to spur one another? How do we push each other towards Christ? What can I say to help this person become who God has created them to be? Encourage each other, he says, all the more as you see the day approaching. 2 more real quick. God can do a lot with our treasure if we make our financial resources available to meet the needs of others. We spent a lot of time on this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on there. If you missed it, go listen to like the 4 parts before this part about generosity. All right, we talked about going from nothing to something and something to consistent to extravagant. But if for just a minute, I just want to remind us that while there's a personal side to what we give financially, there's a corporate side. Right? There's something about a group of people coming together to say, not only am I going to practice this, but we're going to practice this together, and we're going to see what God does. Acts chapter 4, verse 32. Here's what the writer says happened in the New Testament church. He says, all the believers were in one heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own. This was thousands of people in the church. He says they shared everything. With great power, the apostle testified to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there was no, this is insane, there was no needy persons among them. And here's why. From time to time, people who owned land or houses sold them, and they brought the money from the sales, and they put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. I know there's some of us in the room, we get nervous when pastor starts reading that verse, like, oh no, I don't want to sell my lake house. It's not really the point. The point is that something happens when collectively we all decide that we're going to make some of what God has given us financially, our resources, available to meet the needs of the people around us. And I love, one of my favorite things about Soma City Church, I've said this so many times, is that we've built that culture in this place. That a lot of people in here, the reason we're able to do like a women's night tomorrow that's free, and this young adult thing that we're launching, the reason we're able to go to a school and go, man, give us your dream list. I'm like, here it is. We're like, no, give us like the actual dream list. It's because people are doing what they did in Acts chapter 4. People are generous with their resources. And I hope this doesn't scare anybody, but that's the beginning. Man, I as long as God gives me the grace to lead this thing, man, I have such huge dreams for us. I dream of a church where generosity is so normal that people who don't even know God remark about how generous our community is. I dream of a church community where we can go. I met a pastor the other day, and he's like, we're just planting this church in this corner over there, and do you have a TV that we can have? And I'm like, man, I dream of a church where we can, like, bro, we're not going to just give you a TV, man. We're going to pay your salary for an entire year. We're going to fund that thing that you're doing. You don't got to put our name on the plaque. No one even has to know. We're just giving a little bit of what God has given us. I dream of a church that we can go to single moms who are working 3 jobs and go, man, can we just take some of that weight off of you? Can we pay for your van? Can we pay for your mortgage? Can we pay off your medical loans? I dream of a church where we throw the biggest parties in this city for free. We go to schools and we go, teachers, what do you need to be able to teach these kids? What do you need to do your job? And we're gonna do it. And we don't need you to write us a card. We don't need you to put our name on anything. No. We're just recipients of the most gracious God in the world. I dream of that place. But it's only possible when we take a little bit and go, God, I'm going to just be available and see what you can do. Here's the last one, and we'll get out of here. God can do a lot with your temperament. If you make forgiveness, compassion, kindness that you've received available to others, I'm going to be real honest with you. Temperament may not be the best word, but I needed another T. Tables, time, tongue, treasure. I'm like, oh, I got temperament, I guess. I don't know if that works. But you get the idea, right? Is that there ought to be something different about the temperament, so to speak, of followers of Jesus Christ. Not because we're better than everybody else, but because we have the Holy Spirit. And we've experienced grace. And I couldn't think of a better way to end this generosity series than to bring it full cycle back to grace. We said in week 1, generosity is a response to the grace that we have received. And I think one of the ways that God is going to use us to change lives is we just offer a little bit of that grace to the people around us in the form of forgiveness, compassion, and kindness. Like, I don't have to, but I will, because that's what I've been given. I'm just going to be honest with you guys, I'm not good at this. I'm working on it. I mean, just this morning, I had to send an apology to my wife because I was mad and I didn't have compassion and kindness, you know? And it's so easy to just get so, like, mad. And I just imagine God in heaven going, like, can you just give him a little bit of what I gave you? What I give you every day. Imagine if we walked into rooms, your workplace, your school, and you're just like, man, I don't know what God's got. I don't know how any of this is going to change, but I know that I've been given forgiveness, compassion, and kindness. I'm just going to give you a little bit of that. I'm going to just offer it. It's not a lot, but I'm going to just let that go. I'm going to be compassionate, and I'm going to be kind. It sounds like little things, but God can do a whole lot with it. The writer encourages us this way in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. It says, be kind and compassionate to one another. Forgive each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Right? He's not like forgive each other and be kind and compassionate and try really hard because that's the Christian thing to do. No, he's like, that's what God did for you. And so how about we go do that for other people? Our tables, our time, our tongue, our treasure, and our temperament. Before you leave today, I would love for you to just take a few seconds to just identify one or two of those things. Some of you are high achievers, like, I'm going to do all 5. Good luck. The rest of us are going to try and find 1 or 2. What are 1 or 2 things that you can apply? Say, God, give me the grace this week to just show up and be available. And I'm going to see what you're going to do.